The man in the driver's seat, California's sun, had just begun to rise over the hills as Sundar Pichai stepped out of his modest Palo Alto home. Dressed simply in jeans and a light sweater, he looked more like a college professor than the CEO of one of the most powerful tech companies in the world. He stretched, took a sip of his coffee, and looked at his calendar. It was going to be a packed day. His assistant had texted earlier that morning. The car service usually sent to pick him up for meetings was delayed. He didn't want to wait. So he did something he hadn't done in years. He ordered an Uber. Within minutes, a sleek black Toyota Camry pulled up to the curb. Sundar opened the door and slid into the back seat. "Good morning," the driver said with a calm and polite voice. "Morning," Sundar replied, glancing at the rearview mirror. The driver looked familiar. He had gray hair, kind eyes, and a sharp jawline. He carried himself with quiet dignity, like a man who'd seen a lot and wasn't easily shaken. His hands gripped the wheel like someone who had once handled machines far more complex than this car as the car began to roll. Sundar couldn't shake the feeling that he knew this man. There was something about him, his posture, the way he checked the side mirrors, the precision of his driving. The driver looked through the mirror. "Heading to Mountain View, right?" "Yes," Sundar nodded. "To Google headquarters?" The driver smiled faintly. "I used to work down the road from there." "Really?" Sundar's interest perked up. "At which company?" "Tesla," the man said quietly. "But that was a while ago." That's when Sundar's attention sharpened. "You were an engineer?" Sundar asked. The driver gave a small nod. "Lead engineer on several battery systems. Retired 5 years ago, but life had other plans." There was a pause. The car hummed softly. "If you don't mind me asking," Sundar said gently, "why are you driving Uber now?" The man took a deep breath. "My wife got sick. The treatments were expensive. Insurance didn't cover everything. We sold the house, burned through savings. I couldn't watch her suffer. I did everything I could." Sundar felt his chest tighten. "Sorry," he said softly. "She passed away last year," the man continued, eyes on the road. "After she was gone, I couldn't just sit still, so I got behind the wheel again. Not in our lab this time, but here." They stopped at a red light. The driver turned slightly, his eyes meeting Sundar's in the mirror. "You know," he said with a sad smile, "it's funny. I used to help build the future. Now I drive people to it." Sundar felt like someone had just placed a weight on his chest. He looked at the man, then down at his phone. Something inside him stirred. Something deep and human. They drove in silence for a few minutes, but Sundar's mind was racing. Who was this man? How had someone so brilliant and accomplished ended up behind the wheel of a rideshare car? "What's your name?" Sundar asked suddenly. "Ray," the man said. "Raymond Choi." And just like that, Sundar remembered. Raymond Choi wasn't just any engineer. He was the mind behind Tesla's breakthrough in energy density back in 2014. He had spoken at conferences, published papers. He had mentored half of Silicon Valley's battery experts. And now he was driving Sundar to work. Sundar sat back in his seat, stunned. This was no ordinary driver. This was a forgotten genius. As they approached Google headquarters, Sundar was quiet. Ray pulled up to the curb and gently put the car in park. "Here we are," Ray said, voice calm and professional. Sundar didn't move. He looked at the dashboard, then at the man who had once revolutionized electric vehicles. "Ray, would you mind if I asked you to come inside for a moment?" Ray raised an eyebrow. "Inside?" "Yes," Sundar said, slowly. "I want you to meet someone. Actually, a few people." "I'm just your driver, sir?" "No," Sundar said firmly. "You're more than that. And it's time the world remembers." Ray hesitated. "Please," Sundar said, opening the door. He stepped out and waited. Ray looked down at his steering wheel. Then he turned off the ignition and opened his door. He followed Sundar through the revolving doors of Google. Headquarters. Security looked confused as Sundar, the CEO, walked in with an older man in a worn jacket and faded jeans. But no one questioned it. Sundar walked straight past reception and headed toward one of the innovation labs on the third floor. What is this? Ray asked, keeping pace. You'll see. They walked through a glass corridor, past rows of engineers, tapping away at futuristic prototypes. Finally, they reached a small conference room. Inside were 4 young engineers preparing for a demo. Everyone, Sundar said, opening the door. This is Raymond Choi. He's going to join your team. For today's session, the room froze. One of the engineers, a young woman with bright eyes, whispered, Wait. The Raymond Choi? From the Tesla white paper? Sundar nodded. Ray looked stunned. How do you know about that? We studied your work in school, another engineer said. Your model changed everything. Ray's eyes filled with emotion. Mr. Choi, Sundar said gently, I think it's time you stopped driving strangers to the future and started building it again. Ray couldn't speak. His hand trembled slightly as he stepped into the room, greeted by the next generation of thinkers who had grown up reading his work. He looked around, humbled and overwhelmed. Sundar stood at the door for a moment longer, and then, quietly, he walked away. But what Sundar didn't know was that someone had followed him, someone who had seen everything. And someone who wasn't happy. Asterisk the shadow in the hallway, Raymond. Choi stood still for a long moment inside the glass-walled conference room, his weathered hands slowly unclenching. He could feel the warm smiles of the young engineers surrounding him, their faces a mix of awe and reverence. For years, he had walked quietly through life, unnoticed, forgotten, and burdened by the choices of his past. And yet now, in this unlikely moment, he was standing among bright minds who knew his name, not just as a driver, but as a pioneer. He took a slow breath. Something about this felt surreal, like time had been rewound, or like he had stumbled into a dream he had let go of long ago. Would you like to see what we're building? The young woman asked, her voice careful and full of respect. Ray nodded, still unsure if his legs would carry him. Yes, please. They showed him a prototype of a modular energy unit, something designed to store excess power in urban microgrids. The design was impressive, but Ray's mind immediately saw a flaw in the thermal regulation system. As gently as he could, he pointed it out, sketching a quick correction on the nearby whiteboard. Within seconds, the room buzzed with excitement as the engineers realized he was right. His correction would increase efficiency by over 17%, but just outside the room, down the hallway near the elevators, a figure leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching everything through the glass. His name was Calder Griggs. Tall, sharp-suited, and always carrying the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He wasn't an engineer. He was legal counsel head of corporate compliance. And more importantly, he had a long memory and a short fuse when it came to surprises. His gaze was fixed on Ray. It wasn't just recognition. It was something deeper, something darker. He took out his phone and snapped a picture of Raymond, then quietly slipped into a stairwell. Meanwhile, Sundar sat in his office, the morning sun casting wide golden stripes across his minimalist desk. The events of the past hour replayed in his mind, not just like a memory, but like a message he couldn't ignore. Raymond's story had touched something deep in him, something beyond logic, beyond business. He had spent his life believing that innovation was a combination of talent, timing, and access. But what he had just seen reminded him that sometimes even the brightest lights can be hidden under the heaviest clouds. Ray had fallen through the cracks, and Sundar had no intention of leaving him there. His assistant walked in quietly. Sundar, I've scheduled your noon call with the energy team. Also, there's a call from Tesla Legal. They say it's urgent. Sundar raised an eyebrow. Tesla Legal? Did they say why? No, just that it involves someone who used to work with them. Someone named Raymond Choi. Sundar's heart slowed slightly. Thank you. Tell them I'll return the call in 20 minutes. As the assistant left, Sundar stood and walked toward the large window overlooking the Google campus. People below looked like moving dots. Small, purposeful, busy. Just like him once, he didn't know yet what Tesla wanted. But he had the feeling this wasn't going to be just about the past. This felt like something buried was about to come back to the surface. Back in the innovation lab, Ray was already deep in conversation with the engineers. The awkward hesitation was gone, replaced by curiosity, enthusiasm, and mutual respect. They spoke about power curves, resilience under load, and deployment cycles. Ray's eyes lit up like they hadn't in years. Even his posture changed. He didn't look like an Uber driver anymore. He looked like a mentor, a teacher, a leader, and for a moment, he let himself feel it, the joy of being useful again. The quiet thrill of problem solving, the strange but beautiful feeling of belonging. But then his phone buzzed in his pocket. He checked it. Unknown number. No voicemail. Just a message. You shouldn't have come back. He stared at it, his fingers going cold. His throat tightened. He quickly slipped the phone back into his pocket and forced a smile. I need to step out for a moment, just to get some air. The engineers nodded politely. As he exited the room, he didn't notice the eyes that followed him from behind a second door. An intern in the hallway who had overheard his name earlier and decided to Google him. She frowned. There wasn't much. A few old articles. A couple of conference videos, and then nothing after 2016. She clicked on a cache link. Tesla's battery genius suddenly resigns amid internal dispute. But the page was broken. Ray stepped out into the open courtyard of the Google campus. He sat down on a bench under a tree, hands clasped. Heart racing. The message had stirred memories he had spent years trying to suppress. His last year at Tesla hadn't ended with a celebration or a retirement party. It had ended in silence and suspicion. He had left not because he wanted to, but because he was forced to. He had discovered something about a battery prototype that was never meant to be released. A formula that could extend energy storage tenfold, but came with a flaw, a fatal one. It could overheat and ignite under pressure. He had warned them, begged them to delay the launch, but there were deadlines, stockholder pressure, and one powerful executive who told him to stay quiet or be erased. Ray had chosen integrity. And, in doing so, he had lost everything. His resignation had been buried in a web of non-disclosure agreements. His name, once proudly attached to groundbreaking innovations, was gradually scrubbed from publications. People stopped calling, offers stopped coming, and then, just as his wife was diagnosed, the last of his reputation vanished. He had never told her the full story. And now, as he sat on that bench, the past was creeping back. Still love benches, huh? A voice behind him made him flinch. He turned, and there stood Calder Griggs, arms folded, eyes sharp. It's been a long time, Ray. Ray stood up slowly. Calder. Imagine my surprise, Calder said, smirking. Seeing you walk into Google like a consultant. Bold move, considering the terms of your exit agreement. I didn't break any rules, Ray said quietly. I was giving a ride. Sundar invited me in. I didn't apply for a job. Doesn't matter, Calder said. Your name, your presence, your ideas, all of it violates the NDA you signed. In 2016, you were supposed to disappear. Ray's jaw tightened. You think you can still bully me after all these years? I don't need to, Calder said, stepping closer. You signed it, and if you say one word about what happened, even hint at that formula, we'll bury you again, deeper this time. Ray's fist clenched, but he said nothing. Good. Calder said with a cold grin, now get in your car and drive away. But before Ray could move, a shadow appeared beside them. It was Sundar. His arms were crossed, and his expression was unreadable. Is there a problem here? Sundar asked, his voice low, and even Calder straightened. No problem. Just a private chat between old colleagues. Ray works with me now, Sundar said slowly, choosing every word. And if he's being threatened, that's my business. Calder scoffed. You don't know what you're getting into. Maybe, Sundar said. Or maybe you're worried people will start asking questions again about a prototype you were willing to risk lives for. Calder's smile faded. Watch yourself, he said, then turned and walked away. Disappearing into the shadows of the building. Ray stood frozen, unsure of what had just happened. Sundar turned to him. Are you okay? Ray hesitated. No, but I will be. Sundar nodded. Come inside. I think it's time you told me everything. What Ray said next would change everything. Not just for Sundar. Not just for Google. But for the future of clean energy across the entire planet. And for a secret that was never supposed to see the light of day. Asterisk. The formula that could change the world. Sundar and Ray walked back inside, but this time they didn't. Return to the bustling innovation lab or the wide-open glass offices that glittered with ideas and ambition. Instead, Sundar led Ray through a restricted corridor, one known only to senior leadership. There were no signs on the walls, no labels on the doors. Just a quiet hallway that ended in a small, heavily soundproofed room that looked more like a meditation space than a conference suite. Sundar keyed in a code, placed his palm on a scanner, and held the door open for Ray. No cameras in here, Sundar said softly as the door closed behind them. No recordings. Just us. Ray looked around, nodding quietly. The walls were lined with wood and soft. Ray felt, giving the space a warm and calm atmosphere. A single round table sat in the middle. No screens, no distractions. He took a seat across from Sundar, his shoulders slightly hunched from years of carrying weight that no one else could see. Tell me everything, Sundar said. From the beginning. Ray took a long breath. It started in late 2015. We were working on a new battery architecture. Not just incremental improvements, but something revolutionary. A model that could extend the range of an electric car to over 1,200 miles without increasing the size of the battery. Ultra-dense, lightweight, and recyclable. Sundar's eyes widened slightly. That's almost double the industry limit. Exactly, Ray said. It was based on a hybrid formula, part lithium, part graphene lattice. And we figured out a way to keep the cells cool with a new internal venting. Design. He paused, as if even saying the words brought back the late nights, the endless whiteboard sketches, the calculations, the heated arguments in narrow labs. And it worked, he whispered. For a while, Sundar leaned in. What happened? Ray's hands were trembling now, just a little. We ran the final endurance test. It was supposed to simulate extreme real-world driving conditions. Heat, high speed, sharp braking. And on test car number 4, the battery caught fire. Sundar sat back slowly. Was it the design? No, Ray said, shaking his head. It was a pressure threshold issue. One of the internal seals didn't hold during a specific angle of torque stress. It was a narrow failure mode, less than 2% likely. But if it happened in a real car, during a real drive, people would die. The room went still. I filed a report. Recommended a 6-month redesign phase, but Calder and a few others, they were focused on the stock, the market. They said if we paused the launch, we'd miss the window and lose billions. So what did they do? Sundar asked. Ray looked down. They told me to revise the report, to make the numbers look safer. I refused. I said I'd go public. And that's when they silenced you, Sundar said quietly. They gave me a choice, Ray whispered. Sign the NDA. Walk away. Never speak of the project again. Or lose everything. My pension. My savings. My reputation. My ability. To get work anywhere. He let out a bitter laugh. They even hinted they'd spread a story about misconduct. Ruin me professionally. Sundar sat quietly, letting the words settle between them. Why didn't you speak out anyway? He finally asked, Ray's eyes filled with quiet pain. Because my wife had just been diagnosed. Stage 4 lymphoma. We needed every cent for her treatment. I chose silence to keep her alive. Sundar nodded slowly. The weight of that choice settled heavily in the air. Do you still have the original design files? Ray looked up, hesitant. Yes, hidden, encrypted. They've been untouched for years. And if they were fixed? If that 2% failure mode was solved, would the formula still work? Ray nodded slowly. It would change everything. Cars, power grids, even satellite systems. The storage capacity, it's beyond anything we've built since, and it's completely green. A long silence followed. Finally, Sundar spoke. We're going to bring it back. Ray froze. What? We're going to fix the design. We're going to test it safely. And we're going to make it public. Ray shook his head. We can't. The NDA was signed under coercion, Sundar interrupted. And I have a team of lawyers who will argue exactly that. If Calder wants a legal war, he'll get one. Ray's eyes were wide with disbelief. You're serious? Dead serious, Sundar said. And not just because it's the right thing to do, but because the world needs this. Clean energy shouldn't be buried under fear and greed. A knock at the door interrupted them. It was the young engineer from earlier, her face flushed with excitement. Double quotes, Mr. Pichai, she said. Sorry to interrupt, but you asked me to dig into Dr. Choi's published work. I found something strange. Go ahead, Sundar said. She stepped in and placed a tablet on the table. On the screen was a list of scientific papers and citations. One by one, they began to vanish. They're being deleted, she said. As we speak, someone is systematically removing all traces of his contributions. Ray leaned forward, alarmed. That's not possible. Some of these were on public university databases. They're gone now, she said quietly. Calder. Sundar muttered. He's trying to erase you again. Ray stood, visibly shaken. He has access. He still has contacts in multiple institutions. Maybe even former government ones. Not anymore, Sundar said, rising to his feet. From now on, you work here. Full protection. And we're backing up every paper, every file, every drawing you have. Ray blinked. You're putting a target on yourself. Sundar smiled faintly. It won't be the first time. And it's worth it. Just then, an alert flashed on Sundar's phone. He read it, paused, then looked up. Ray? He said slowly. Your house. The apartment you live in now. It just caught fire. Ray's breath stopped. What? Fire department says it was electrical. But the building was inspected just last month. No issues reported. Ray grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself. Everything I had was in there. My drives, backups. Sundar put a hand on his shoulder. If they're escalating this fast, it means you're right. And it means we're close to something they don't want the world to see. Meanwhile, Calder sat in a quiet boardroom downtown, flanked by two men in dark suits. One of them passed him a phone. They're moving fast, the man said. Choi's been hired. Pichai's digging? Burn it all, Calder whispered. If we lose control of that formula, it's not just profit, it's geopolitical. Do you understand? The energy shift alone could destabilize entire economies. The man leaned in. We have one shot left. The girl. What girl? Calder asked the intern. She's been tracking Choi's work on her own. If she gets curious, she could blow this whole thing open. Calder tapped the table, slowly, thinking, then we deal with her too. Back at Google, Ray stood in the center of a new lab Sundar had cleared out for him. The walls were white, the space quiet, the hum of possibility hanging in the air. Young engineers gathered around him as he opened his notebook, the same one he had carried for over a decade. Worn at the edges, pages yellowed with time, filled with sketches and numbers and quiet brilliance. He looked at them. Fresh minds, eager eyes, unjaded hearts. We're not just rebuilding a battery, he said softly. We're reclaiming a future. But as he turned the page, his phone buzzed again. One message. We know where she's buried. His face went white. Sundar saw the change instantly. Ray? What is it? Ray handed him the phone, silent. Sundar read the message. And for the first time that day, even he felt fear. Asterisk buried truths and broken promises. Moment Sundar read the message. The air in the lab shifted. He could feel the quiet tension behind. Him as the engineers waited for his next word, unaware of the storm that had just begun to brew. Ray stood frozen, his breathing shallow, eyes locked on the words on the screen. We know where she's buried, that it wasn't just a threat, that it was a message only he could understand. His wife, Elena, had been his anchor through every storm. She was his calm when deadlines closed in, his joy when the world grew too heavy, and his reason to keep breathing when the industry turned its back on him. But there had been a secret one only she and Ray knew. A secret he had buried with her because it was too dangerous to keep alive. And now, someone else knew. Ray, Sundar said, stepping closer. You need to tell me everything. Not just about the formula. Everything. Ray's hands were trembling, but he nodded slowly. Not here. Sundar didn't argue. He turned and addressed the engineers. Take a break, all of you. Get some food, some air. We'll reconvene in 2 hours. The team filed out with a mix of curiosity and concern. Something was clearly happening behind the scenes, but none of them dared to ask. Not yet, once the door closed. Sundar guided Ray back to the private room they used earlier. The walls still felt warm, protective. A small sanctuary in the middle of the chaos. Ray sat down slowly, rubbing his temples. There's something I've never told anyone. Not even during the India discussions. Not during the investigation. Not even after Elena died. Sundar waited, patient and focused. Elena was a materials chemist, Ray said. What most people don't know is she co-designed part of the formula. Sundar blinked. She was involved? Deeply, Ray nodded. We met during a collaborative research event in Santa Clara. She was working on a molecular bonding method that could stabilize graphene under heat stress. Her solution solved the overheating flaw that crippled most experimental cells. He paused, voice cracking with memory. She didn't want credit. She was happy being in the background, but that innovation, it was hers, and when I walked away, I took her work with me, locked it away. And when she got sick, I told her it would all stay buried, for her safety. Sundar leaned forward. Are you saying the formula isn't fully yours? I'm saying, Ray replied, that if someone found out her name was tied to it, they might try to find her research, her notes. Maybe even pressure me by desecrating her memory. The place where she's buried is not public knowledge. No obituary, no headstone. Just a small grave under a tree in the hills outside Los Altos. He swallowed hard. Someone knows. Someone followed me. They know what I buried with her. Sundar's face darkened. What exactly did you bury? A microdrive, Ray said softly. Containing the raw formula, her last edits. It was her idea. She told me to hide it away where no one would look. Not in a safe, not in a server, but somewhere personal, sacred. Sundar stood up immediately. We need to go there, now. Ray hesitated. It might be too late. Then let's not waste time, Sundar replied. They left the building through a back entrance. No security, no drivers. Just Sundar behind the wheel of his own car, an older model Lexus he kept for days when he wanted to blend in. The drive through the Silicon Valley hills was silent at first, broken only by the occasional hum of tires on asphalt as they climbed higher into the hills. The world behind them began to disappear into a blur of city lights and fading towers. Nature took over. Trees thickened, roads narrowed, and somewhere, buried in a clearing behind a moss-covered oak, was the last trace of Elena Troy's brilliance. Up here, Ray whispered, guiding Sundar through a dirt road, half consumed by weeds. They parked near a grove of tall redwoods. The wind was light, but the air felt heavier with each step. Ray walked slowly, then stopped beneath a crook tree with bark that curled like paper. Here, he said, this is where she rests. Sundar stood silently as Ray knelt, brushing aside leaves and soft soil. After a few minutes of digging with his bare hands, Ray uncovered a small weatherproof box, no bigger than a wallet. He opened it. Inside was a sealed microdrive, wrapped in a cloth embroidered with Elena's initials. His hands trembled as he held it. But Before he could stand, a branch snapped behind them. They turned sharply. A figure stepped out from the trees. Not Calder. Someone else. Younger. Lean. Eyes cold behind mirrored sunglasses. Wearing a dark windbreaker and holding a small device. In his hand, Mr. Choi, he said evenly, "You've been asked to let this go." Sundar stepped forward. "Who are you?" A man ignored him. "The microdrive." Handed over. Ray stood slowly. "You work for Calder?" The man's lip twitched. "I work for the people who don't want energy independence to become a reality." "So you'd rather see the world burn for profit?" Sundar asked. Voice sharp. The man raised the device in his hand. It blinked red. "This is an e-burst trigger," he said. One click and every unshielded drive within 50 feet is fried. "Your little artifact here, gone. Forever." "Raise." Grip tightened on the drive. "Then you'll have to destroy it with me holding it." The man didn't move. "You're not going to do that," Sundar said calmly, stepping beside Ray. "Because someone like you doesn't make decisions. You carry out orders. And your job is to scare people like us into giving up. But that ends today." The man hesitated. Just then, from behind the trees, 3 more figures appeared, security agents from Google's executive protection team. Sundar had quietly triggered an emergency code from his phone on the drive up. "You have 10 seconds to disappear," one of the agents said, holding up a scanner. "And don't bother detonating your toy. This area is shielded. You've already lost." The man clenched his jaw, stepped back, and disappeared into the trees. Back at Google, the drive was immediately taken into a secure vault. A specialized team, handpicked by Sundar, began working around the clock to decrypt it and cross-reference the data with Ray's original sketches. And what they found was breathtaking. A battery formula that could change not only electric vehicles, but also grid-scale storage, disaster relief energy, deep space exploration, and even developing world access to power. And it was real. Sundar convened a secret council trusted leaders from energy, infrastructure, and global development sectors. Each one stunned by what they saw, but not all were supportive. "This technology will disrupt too much too fast," one exec warned. "You'll collapse entire economies built on fossil fuel logistics." "Good," Sundar said. "Let them fall." 2 days later, an internal alert popped up across Google's security channels. One of their engineers, the young woman who first discovered Ray's papers, disappearing, was missing. Her name was Emily, 27. Brilliant. Without a trace. Her last known location, a tech conference in San Francisco. Her hotel room, untouched. Phone, dead. Ray felt like the floor had fallen out from beneath him. "They're coming after anyone close to this," he said. "Anyone who knows." Sundar stood quiet, but his face had hardened. "Then we bring this out into the light," he said. "How?" Ray asked. "The legal war alone will crush us." "Not if we go public first," Sundar replied. "Not just a release. Not a paper. Something bigger." "Like what?" "A live demonstration," Sundar said. "Undeniable, unstoppable. We'll show the world before anyone can stop us." Ray looked at him, the spark returning to his eyes. "I can build the prototype," he said, "but we'll need materials, labs, secrecy." "You'll have it," Sundar promised, but deep in a secured boardroom downtown. Calder Griggs was already watching the feed. He clicked on a frozen frame of Ray holding the microdrive. "They're moving too fast," he muttered. "Then we go nuclear." His associate leaned forward. "You mean?" "Yes," Calder said, voice like ice. "We leaked the real reason Ray left Tesla. The full, unfiltered version. But it's not true." "Doesn't matter," Calder said. "Truth never mattered. Only what people believe." He pressed send. And within minutes, headlines began to appear across news sites. "Disgraced engineer resurfaces at Google accused of covering up battery fire deaths. Asterisk. The weight of lies and the fire of truth. When the headlines broke, they didn't trickle, they exploded. By noon the next day, every major tech blog, every mainstream news outlet, and every social media feed was flooded with one name, Raymond. Choi. Words like scandal, cover-up, and disgraced scientist echoed across screens. Videos from years ago were dug-up clips of Tesla press conferences. Grainy footage from lab walkthroughs, even blurry photos of Ray walking alone in hospital corridors after Alea's chemotherapy sessions. Everything was twisted, manipulated, repackaged for outrage. Sundar watched it unfold from his office, jaw clenched. He had seen media storms before. But this wasn't a storm, it was a calculated demolition. On one screen, a news anchor speculated about possible deaths connected to early prototype battery models. On another, a former executive from a competing battery startup claimed Ray had once stolen lab materials to speed up development. There was no evidence. There didn't need to be. The mere suggestion was enough. And in the center of it, all the image that kept replaying, Ray walking behind Sundar at Google headquarters, looking humble, confused, vulnerable. It was meant to destroy him. Ray sat in a quiet room on the lower level of the Google campus, his phone buzzing nonstop. He didn't answer. He couldn't. His hands trembled. His stomach turned. All he could do was stare at the screen. In front of him, watching his name be torn apart, piece by piece. The worst part wasn't the lies. It was the silence from people he had once called colleagues. Scientists he had mentored. Engineers he had defended. No one spoke up. No one corrected the narrative. No one risked being next. They're erasing me again. He whispered. The room was dim, except for the soft glow from the overhead light. Sketches for the prototype lay scattered across the desk, blueprints that could change the world. But now they felt like artifacts from a dream that had been yanked away just before it could come true. Sundar entered quietly. Ray didn't look up. It's over. No, Sundar said, sitting across from him. This is when we fight. Ray shook his head. You don't get it. I lived through this once already. The whispers, the questions, the looks in the hallway. They don't need to prove anything. They just need to cast doubt. And they've done it. Then we clear your name, Sundar said firmly. Publicly. Completely. Ray's eyes were tired. With what? Tesla's legal team will bury us before we can even show a battery cell? Sundar leaned in. Then we use what they fear most. The formula? No, Sundar said. The truth. The next morning, Sundar held a private meeting with his legal team, communications specialists, and a group of investigative journalists he trusted. He laid everything out, every detail Ray had shared, every file they had decrypted, every record. They had backed up. You're going to release it? One lawyer asked cautiously. Not all of it, Sundar said. Just enough to prove he was telling the truth from the beginning. A journalist, a soft-spoken woman with a long record of exposing corruption in tech, tapped her pen. What if they come after us too? They will, Sundar said. But we'll publish across 50 platforms. Synced, simultaneous, mirror links, video, text, documentation. By the time they try to contain it, it'll already be in the bloodstream. She nodded. Double quotes and one more thing, Sundar added. We need to tell Elena's story. Ray hesitated when Sundar brought it up later that day. She never wanted the spotlight. He said quietly, I know, Sundar said. But if they're willing to dig up her name for their lies, we owe it to her to put the truth out first. That night, Ray recorded a video. No script, no teleprompter. Just him in a small room with nothing but a chair, a table, and a photo of Elena beside him. His voice cracked as he spoke. My name is Raymond Choi. I'm not here to defend myself. I'm here to tell you the truth. He talked about the formula, about the cover-up, about the day he walked away from everything to protect the woman he loved. He spoke slowly with tears in his eyes, describing how Elena's research was the missing piece. How she had whispered through pain and nausea, don't let them erase what matters. He held up the microdrive. This is her legacy, and I will not let it be stolen again. By the time he finished, Sundar and half the team watching in the next room were silent, moved to tears. They launched the video the next day, alongside a coordinated leak of documents, lab footage, internal memos, and authenticated research logs. Everything was verified by third-party labs and academic researchers. The response was immediate. Within hours, the narrative began to shift. Former colleagues reached out. Small forums turned into loud voices. Whistleblowers from within Tesla's old research wing began emailing journalists, confirming details Ray had shared. Even a retired safety officer came forward, anonymously stating he had been pressured to sign off on the prototype despite known flaws. And then something unexpected happened. A clip surfaced a conference panel from 2016. Blurry footage. A panelist had been caught on mic saying, Ray Choi was right, but they shut him up. It went viral. Millions watched it. Hashtags exploded. Hashtag bring back Ray trended worldwide. But the battle wasn't over. Tesla's single quotes S legal team filed an injunction the next morning, accusing Google of violating confidentiality clauses and intellectual property theft. They claimed Ray had maliciously leaked proprietary information and demanded immediate takedown of all related content. Sundar, standing before a sea of reporters, simply said, "You cannot silence the truth." He then held up a patent document that Ray had filed in 2014, long before the project was internalized. The formula's core belonged to Ray. Legally and ethically, it was checkmate. In the background of all this, the prototype was nearly ready. Ray, despite the media firestorm, spent 14 hours a day in the lab, surrounded by young minds who looked at him not with doubt, but with admiration. He moved with quiet purpose, slowly rebuilding the dream he once thought he'd buried forever. And as the prototype took shape, so did something else. Hope. The kind that spreads when people realize that maybe, just maybe, things can change. Emily, the missing engineer, was found in a motel on the edge of town, shaken but safe. She told a harrowing story of being followed, threatened, and forced into hiding. It only added fuel to the public outrage. Her first words when she saw Ray again, "I never stopped believing you." And finally the day came, a global live stream. Announced with just 24 hours. Notice. Over 50 million people tuned in. Scientists, activists, students, politicians, and ordinary people from every corner of the world. On a large stage under the open sky, Ray stood next to Sundar. Behind them, the prototype, a compact, sleek, silent battery no larger than a suitcase. This, Ray said, is the result of years of work, of sacrifice, of silence, and now it speaks for itself. He pressed a button. The battery powered an entire house's lighting system. Then a high-performance car. Then a massive data rack. The crowd gasped. But the final moment came when Sundar connected it to a satellite relay system. This battery, Sundar said, just sent a signal to the International Space Station, using less energy than it takes to run a refrigerator. The crowd erupted, and somewhere deep in the night sky, a tiny light blinked in response. Confirmation. It had worked. Not everyone clapped. Calder, watching from a remote screen, sat quietly. Picked up his phone. Phase 1 failed, he muttered. We go to Phase 2. What's Phase 2? The voice on the other end asked. He looked out the window, his smile thin and poisonous. We destroy everything he loves. From the inside. Asterisk, the final spark days following the live stream were like nothing Ray had ever experienced. Headlines no longer dragged his name through the mud. Instead, they celebrated him. They called him a visionary, a pioneer, a man who had sacrificed everything to give the world a chance and a better future. The very streets he once drove as a quiet Uber driver now echoed with praise and admiration. Strangers sent letters. Students wrote messages thanking him for inspiring their research. Families from energy-poor regions around the world pleaded for his technology to reach them. But as the applause grew louder, so did the danger. Sundar knew it. And so did Ray. Because when you hold something that powerful, something that threatens the world's largest profits, control structures, and outdated systems, you don't just face criticism. You face war. It started with whispers, subtle, barely there, inconsistencies in the lab data, power curves that didn't quite match previous tests. Reports disappearing from the cloud. Design files being overwritten with corrupted versions. The engineering team noticed first. This isn't a glitch, one of them said nervously, scrolling through the logs. Someone is inside the system. Sundar ordered an internal audit. What they found shook him. A backdoor had been installed weeks ago, buried in a line of code so deeply disguised it looked like ordinary system noise. And it hadn't been inserted by an outsider. It had come from someone on the inside. Someone trusted. We have a mole, Sundar said grimly, pacing the secure room. Someone planted by Calder before this ever went public. Ray sat still, staring at the corrupted data. They're trying to destroy the prototype before it can be mass-produced. And if they succeed, Sundar said, they'll tell the world the battery was a lie. Just like they tried to tell the world you were a lie. Silence hung between them. We can't let that happen, Ray finally said. We're too close.